Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, where we dive deep into the media industry headlines and dissect the digital disruption that diverges the masses into the new media counterculture and away from the media establishment. Here is the king of podcasts.
We know there was quite a groundswell for podcasting into the pandemic because everybody was stuck at home and they were locked down, and they just got into the business of maybe we can monetize, maybe we can put some content together, maybe there's something we can put out there that might catch on with an audience. And, maybe some people might have not stayed with it, unlike yours truly, which I've been doing this show for now, 3.5 years now? I started in January 2018, and I've continued ever since, and it's been a ride, let me tell you what. And right now, on episode number 234 of the program, here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Thanks for listening in. So podcasting in general, we're seeing some normalization of certain things when it comes to the way advertising is. The way it's being done, kind of like a radio business, but there's still the room for grassroots podcasting out there for shows like this to thrive and be able to do something. And for me, even if I don't make that much money on the show, and that's okay. I mean, I have my other ways of making income. I don't worry about that too much because I'm just trying to enjoy myself and talk about things that I don't have anybody else to talk to about this. That's what it comes down to me. It's something I really need to have. There's so many stories that come out every week, and I wish there was always someone I could go and talk to about all these stories. And then I've even changed the format of some of the shows where I changed the name of this show once, and I changed the name of another show just recently because it's a constantly evolving, changing medium. And radio people that want to stay into the know and want to still be involved, sure, they might not have attached themselves to podcasting early on, say in 2010 or whatever, or 2012 when I started to get into my own independent podcasting, and that's prior to already having done 7 years of podcasting in general. Keep this in mind. I started doing podcasts before they were called podcasts on August 1st, 2005, and I'll be celebrating going into my 18th year doing podcasting, which it wasn't even called that when I got into this business because it was an online radio network of 2 online radio networks. And this has been a very unique situation that I've enjoyed very much. And the option to go and be able to continue to do my shows and really consistently keep doing it week after week because I enjoy it. Even when there are bumps in the road that make things a little bit tough to go and keep the schedule going, I still do it anyway, no matter what. And I've enjoyed it so much. But podcasting right now, there's a lot of things being said about how people are feeling it is taking a bit of a plateau. It is taking a plateau. So there was going to be some stagnation at some point. We know. And listen, there's some stories out there where podcasting's hitting a plateau. And, some people are going to go and talk about Spotify because their latest quarterly report says they're not hitting their earnings mark. But you can't tell me it's just not just podcasting and just the music part. I mean, there's multifaceted reasons as to why they're not hitting. But it's just like an Uber. It's just like other technological disruptive businesses that were brought in. And because of the valuation and because of the potential, there was a lot of subsidizing by major investors to keep this going, even though it might not be turning the full profit. And so if Spotify hasn't done that yet, it doesn't take away their price, doesn't want to take away their value. So it's going to continue to go for them. And what needs to happen is certain podcasts need to find their way to the top, but it is kind of hard to break out and become such a standout. And you can see that because of the amount of different programming that's out there that, if you look on a TikTok feed or Instagram or wherever, and how many times do you see any kind of content with somebody with a microphone in front of them, a Shure M7 or USB or an Audio Technica or a Rodecaster or whatever? Like, how many different people do you see out there that are doing podcasts and they got the microphone, got the arm, all that thing going on? Are they just doing normal content, like just short form content for TikTok, for Instagram, for YouTube? Or are they doing podcasting? And if you're going to identify which shows are podcasting, because even if it's on YouTube, it's still podcasting. Even though there might be a video component, it's still a podcast because it can always be converted into an audio form, either which way. And there are a lot of shows right now that do the video portion as well. I just don't do it because I don't need to get myself dressed up. I like the comfort of being comfortable, sitting in my chair, sitting behind my microphone with my laptop in front of me and just talking through and not even thinking anything otherwise. It's been quite a bit of a change, and the evolution got a good growth spurt for a long time. And for the Plateau right now, it's okay. Listen, we need a little bit of drop off. We can have a little bit of turnover of programming that does not stay around, and people that just got tired of it and just I'll do limited series. I don't need to go and keep doing it ongoing. Talk shows come and go, and other programming comes and goes as well. So there's some stories that come in here as to why this is all happening. So let's start off with, first of all, Inside Radio put out a good story about how podcasting is growing, the listening. But we're talking about the fact that there's some points where podcast launches have plummeted. So this is where we're talking about. The launching of new podcasts, the amount of podcasts that are out there are plateauing. The listenership has not. So this is what they're saying right now. I'll take there's a couple of stories that InsideRadio.com put together. I'm going to take the first one that talked about how it is plummeting. The amount of launches are plummeting. Let's start with that first. And so Podcast Search Engine Listen Notes reports this. The number of podcasts continued to rise during the first half of the year, with more than 2.8 million podcasts being created worldwide. But Listen Notes also says that almost 100,000 new podcasts launched across the globe, but that is 80% less from a year ago when there were almost 500,000 new podcasts debuting during the first 6 months of 2021. It's all part of what was going on with the pandemic. People were still locked down. People were still not going back out and trying to normalize themselves like we at today. Maybe some people have not gotten there yet, but there's quite a few that have. And in this, they said that January was the biggest month for new podcast launches so far this year. Listen Note says that almost over 20,000 went live that month, and every consecutive month with fewer debuts. So just in the month of June, there was half that number, 8,747. That was compared to January last year. So they show that 2020 was the biggest year with over 1 million podcasts launched in 2020. So that's the pandemic. And then it's also TikTok. And that's also where social media has created, where some people that might do short form content, well, they decided to do some long form content. And it really is just piecemealing. What do you want to do? What's the serving size you want to give? Do you want it to be 30 seconds? Do you want it to be 60 seconds? Do you want it to be 5, 10 minutes, an hour, 3 hours? It doesn't matter. But you also have to think about that with the podcasts that you create. You have to think about the length of time that you're devoting to it. And that's the one thing I always think about as well. That there are some shows that come out and they're doing too much. You know, to go ahead and do a show and then you just kind of ramble. Let me just put this out to you perspective. My goodness. Right now where I'm at Cannabis Radio, I'm actually producing 5 new podcasts. I don't know a lot of other people that are doing the same thing I'm doing, where I'm coaching, consulting, prepping, and in some cases I'm basically feeding the questions to the hosts to feed up. And some, you know, they take a little bit of difference than others, and we're doing 30-minute programs because of the fact that, and we're not exactly 30 minutes is not the exact science. Some shows are just better off at timing themselves out. Some of the others might take a little bit longer. We might go 40, 45 minutes, and that's okay. I do the Blunt Business Show, and I also go a little bit longer in most cases. Sometimes I don't. But it's a matter of that I want to concentrate what's being talked about in terms of we can have the conversation, we can have the back and forth. But what I want most importantly is to make a show worth listening to for the audience and that you don't have a dull moment. We don't have a dull minute. Because remember, you're going to have advertising that's going to be brought into your programs, especially if you're getting them dynamically inserted because of the podcast host that you have. A lot of them already have ad service right now. If you reach a certain plateau, you get to be qualified. And some shows are different than others. But when you have that, you have to think about the fact that we want to be able to have programming out there that is good enough for advertisers to jump on. I mean, some people might not care about that. They just want to be able to go and talk, and that's okay. But if you're trying to do good content and you want to make sure you want to have people listening for a long period of time, I mean, one of the things that I know that with YouTube, I don't make that much. I take the stats that come up on YouTube, and I'll be able to use that as a designation as to how many people are listening to my program on a regular basis, besides the audio portion. If I just put it up there with a slate on video, and it doesn't matter if I'm on camera or not. I mean, there's a certain audience and a certain type of programming that fits well and does very well. So I look at that, and sometimes I'm going to do shows where I'm not going to be able to talk about Kate Bush or BTS or Drake and Beyonce and all these other great fun stories, because this is one of those news weeks. It's one of those weeks in broadcasting that there wasn't too much to say, but there's a bunch of stories that come out, surveys, studies, commentary. Was a good week to talk about podcasting and journalism. Back to my original point. So when it comes to podcasting, doing 30 minutes, or if you want to do an hour, you want to be able to make it where that you are concentrating what you're talking about. You just don't want to give out fluff. You don't want to give somebody a reason to go ahead and turn off your podcast, because it's just voice. It's just voices that you're listening to. You got to keep yourself compelling and interesting the whole time. You don't let a guest ramble on for so long. The host shouldn't ramble on for so long. Get your questions concise, make a point, and then follow up with questions and make it engaging. And engage with them. Show that you're actually caring about what's being said. You're not just giving somebody a platform just to chatter away. You want to make it where you're talking to them and you're realizing, oh man, I need to, I want to make sure that the audience is realizing that I'm going to speak for them, since I'm not doing a call-in show. I'm not doing something that's instant engagement unless I'm doing a live stream or a Twitch or a Twitter space or whatever, or Clubhouse. You want to have it where if you don't have that engagement, you need to play the audience. You need to play the audience member. You need to play the people that would be at a conference, listening to you at a seminar or a TED Talk, and they get a chance for question and answer. You want to be able to answer those questions. You want to be able to think of the audience and then think of the guest and think of not asking the same questions you've heard before and asking poignant questions. We just don't like fluff. I mean, some shows are different, and sometimes the profile of the guest that you have on, you're lucky to have them on. I mean, listen, sometimes I'm just surprised on which particular celebrities will go on particular shows and how that happens. Like I just saw Matt Damon go on a podcast. I'm like, wow, that's pretty good to get somebody like that on that show. And the level of work you have to do to get that guest on. And in some cases, if you're even to get them into a studio where you can do the show itself, that's got to be tough. But there are some people that do podcasting and, they want to do it like a TV show, but still, if you're doing the microphone setup like you are, you're not using a lavaliers, you're not setting yourself up necessarily on a, with director's chairs, you're doing it in front of a set, you're not doing it in some kind of a Tonight Show kind of feel to it, or like you'd see a conventional talk show, think Kelly Clarkson, Drew Barrymore, whatever. If you're doing the couch show, if you're doing where so many shows, you see them basically doing the Howard Stern show. It's that. They have the couch. They have the whole thing. They want to do, and even Howard Stern has changed his set. But if you look, you're either going to see the Joe Rogan type look, or you're going to see the Howard Stern look. There are just some people that want to have that look. They don't care about it being like a full studio in some cases. Sometimes they do. And when they do that, it's like kind of a Levitard show kind of feel. We're like, oh, look at all these microphones all over the place. Or there's some where you're just seeing it's a radio show, and that's the way they're set up. Levitard show still has a radio studio. Breakfast Club, you see their setup. It's got a million microphones all over the place. But to do the shows that they do, I mean, some of those shows are long form anyway. That's just the way they're set. But when you're looking at what they're doing now in podcasting, there are certain shows with such a high profile, it doesn't matter what they say and the guests they have on, it doesn't matter what they talk about. That's why Joe Rogan can get away with a 3-hour show, and he could just ramble sometimes, and they could just go on to whatever topics they want to go, whatever direction they want to go. For me, listen, I appreciate Joe Rogan. He is the top dog right now, still. But I think about the fact that if I had to take that show and I had to edit it, I would probably be able to cut that down to an hour and a half, or maybe even less than that. Because there's just some things that, if I wanted the audience to care, I'll do that. And I mean, sometimes I take the leisure of taking certain programs especially with the new ones we're producing now, I've had no problem chopping them down when I felt like, okay, the hosts are still learning, and the rambling, the ums and ahs, the stuttering, the stammering, the crutch words, and so at the end of the day, what's funny? All these different crutch words everybody has. You have to cut those out. If you can do that, and you can keep yourself focused and wired into what you're talking about, that's going to be the best way to make a great podcast. But that art is an art form. It's not easy. Not everybody can do it. Not everybody can have that gift of gab and just continue to go along. Like, I'm kind of fascinated myself where I can continue to do these shows, and I'm just sitting here. Sometimes, sure, I could go ahead right now like I am, and I can go off script. I can go ahead without the news stories in front of me. I'll bring them back up and read them, comment on those. But at the moment right now, this is just straight up ad lib. I could do shows like this, but I don't think the audience wants me to do this all the time. Sometimes I want to do a monologue, and I'll put one out there in front because I have some things to say. And when I get them off my chest, we move along with the show. And I also think when I do this program, just like the due diligence I have for my audience and the structure that I do for myself in general, my wrestling program, I keep it to an hour. The Broadcasters Podcast, I'll keep it to an hour. And let me tell you, sometimes if I don't have enough content to work out an hour, I'm not going to stretch it either. So many times I've done this show where I've stopped at 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes because you know what? I'm not going to stretch out the show. I've already talked about what I want to talk about. And the same thing goes with the shows that I produce now. These new shows, once we get to the point of talking about what we want to talk about, find a proper ending and peace out. And that's it. Like today we did an episode where I had 3 guests on. I set up questions for this particular show. And I remember I had a couple other questions that were going to be kind of fluff and just, we were going to kind of talk about, it was the entertainment-based guest. Okay. I'll just give you the hint. A former manager of Kanye West, John Monopoly. He now runs a cannabis project called Urban Aroma. And he's now working with an artist named Umi and one half of Dead Prez, the hip-hop duo M1. And we interviewed them for a show called Hempire. In that show, I could have had the hosts go on and talk about with John Monopoly, hey, let's talk about your stuff with Kanye West. Let's talk about your stuff with all these other artists and what are their thoughts on cannabis and how they kind of build together. I didn't go into that part because we were already about 45 minutes in. We're already running out of time. And I was like, you know what? I got what I wanted out of this interview. And I am helping these hosts to go the direction of how they want the show to go. They want to be able to have this chance to a couple different reasons to have the show. But the one thing that I want to make sure of is to have a good, compelling, fun, exciting, interesting radio show. And we're doing that right now. But also, it's a matter of to try to show them how to do radio. It's not the easiest science. They can talk. They don't have a problem talking, but I also want to make sure they're talking about the right things, that they're kind of keeping a structure while being able to be themselves. It's a lot of mental gymnastics to do. But if you do it right, you can do like some shows out there where you don't have notoriety or any kind of profile to your name, and you could do pretty well. And if it doesn't matter, listen, I was in the radio business in the first place, and you know what? For this to be where it is, I'm fine with it because I enjoy radio. I want to still keep doing something where I'm in front of a microphone, and this gives me that opportunity. So let's move along to what they're saying about podcasting. Back to this listen notes survey, this study, that they're saying that 1 in 5 podcasts, or more than 600,000 shows, have been active so far this year. That's more than 3 times as many active shows in 2019, or compared to 2021, which was 724,000 active shows. Now, the pace of dead shows is slower than what it was in the past. And they also talk about that there are more than 13 million episodes that have been released in 2022, representing 1 in nearly 10 of 137,857,843 episodes that Listen Notes now counts worldwide. That's incredible. And when you look at the kind of podcasts that are out there, most shows are in English. 60% And 12% were Spanish, 7% Portuguese, Indonesian 5%, German 3%, running out the top 5. When it comes to genres, they show that society and culture represents almost 14% of all shows. Education 13%, arts 10%, business 9%, religion and spirituality almost 9%, 8.5%, comedy 7%. Health and fitness, 6%. News, 5%. Followed by leisure, music, sports, TV and film, technology, kids and family, and science, all under 5%. And so they say there's a lot of more dead podcasts per year. There was a lot more in 2020, and then it died back down in 2021. And in 2022, it's not as bad. So there is a lot to be said. Now, in the terms of the amount of podcasts that are available, I think that's just the market kind of correcting itself. And that's what I think it is, as a correction. Because if some shows are not seeing much of a difference in terms of downloads or in terms of audience or in terms of revenue, they'll stop. They'll find another way to do content, whatever that they decide to do. According to Reuters, they say the podcast listening is again growing in 2022, but the news habits are changing. According to Reuters, they say now that 37% of Americans said they listened to a podcast in the last month. And the gains come despite what Reuters says there's some worries about the reliability of the content. So one person says that in the survey, a 23-year-old American man took the survey and said, I listen to Joe Rogan a lot, but he's not a reliable news source. He's just some guy with a podcast. Well, podcasting doesn't have to be a source of news. And I hate to break this to you, but there's not a lot of places to go for news in the first place, which we'll talk about journalism in just a moment. In the survey, or in this study they did, Spotify continues to gain ground over Apple and Google podcasts, and a number of countries, and YouTube is also benefiting from the popularity of video-led and hybrid podcasts, so audio and video format. And podcasts are likely also benefiting from what Reuters says is a clear through line in this year's report, the changing habits of younger people, especially under age 30. And that the pandemic and other shocks of the past few years have accelerated structural media shifts towards digital and mobile media. So yeah, they're not looking at traditional media as much anymore. And they're engaging more in podcasting, which is great. So Reuters reports that young people like a range of formats and media, from text to video to audio, and are drawn to information that is curated for them. On top of that, many young people have a wider definition of what news is. Reuters says this qualitative research reveals that younger audiences use a much wider umbrella to decide what fits the definition under the older demos. Now, they also talk about the fatigue of news. They say there's a slightly less optimistic picture for the news industry compared to a year ago when the coronavirus was driving news consumption. News interest has fallen sharply across markets from 63% in 2017 to 51% in 2022, and the proportion of news consumers who say they avoid news often or sometimes has increased sharply across the globe. That in the data, roughly 15% of people in the U.S. are disconnecting from the news. And less than half of the Americans in the sample are very or extremely interested in news, compared to 67% in 2015. There are reasons for this. Also, trust in the news has fallen almost half the countries in the survey. That the trust level now in the U.S. is 26%, the lowest of any country tracked by Reuters. Only 41% of Americans say they trust the news they themselves use. They also say in the report that, quote, we find that interest in news and overall news consumption has declined considerably in many countries, while trust has fallen back almost everywhere. We're seeing news fatigue set in, not just around COVID-19, but around politics and another range of other subjects, with the number of people actively avoiding news increasing markedly. That's why journalism is dying a slow death. If you notice, that's just the way it is. This is part of the Reuters Institute Digital News Report of 2022. And what they did was, the study was commissioned by the Reuters Institute and for the study of journalism and YouGov, an online questionnaire during January and February over 2,000 respondents to this report. That's what they got for that there. Now, the other thing that's also brought up that is from Podsights, which is the leading podcast attribution measurement firm. They say that the average podcast ad frequency has doubled in the past year, reducing podcast conversions. Yes, even this show has added a few more ads to the mix because we can. And, if I'm still doing a good job of trying to put out good content and keeping everybody around to listen to a couple of commercials, which will support the show short enough time to go ahead and go into the next portion of the show, because I'm trying to make sure to go ahead and do as much as I can to make this good for everybody to listen to. They look at a number of things as to why there's a podcast ad frequency problem and why brands need to remind the many, not lecture the few. So ad campaigns and the frequency of them are soaring, causing the proportion of site visits and purchase rates to fall. And the solution is to grow reach at the expense of frequency. And podcasts have audience scale. The reach has tripled since 2016 as 1/4 of American persons 18 to 49 years old are reached daily. So keep that in mind there. There's all these things going on where, remind the many, don't lecture the few. This whole story about while podcasting is saturated, everybody's taking advantage of the ad game. Because it's also easy to go and add advertising anyway right now, more than ever, if you notice how that's working. And this is something to keep in mind when it comes to podcasting. If you want to have advertising on it, especially if you're on YouTube, you better be putting out some good content. You don't want to, it's already bad enough when you have people trying to listen to a show. Yeah, if you want to do a subscription model, have people to go on the Patreon to follow along with more content, hey, go have at it. There are some people that are definitely trying to milk the audience for what they can get because they're notoriety. Their status has made them have the opportunity to do that. And you find different ways to continue to do things where you create merchandise, you do Patreon, you do cameos, you do all these other things to try to monetize. And you try to create some affiliate programs to help also in the same vein. And, you offer advertising possibilities out there to do live reads and try to go and use your status to go ahead and put more money in your pocket. And that's for those that are trying to do this full time, which is not easy, but it can be done. And also, if you're trying to go and focus on podcasting and it's one of many different things that you're doing, it's just keeping in mind that when you're doing this, you want to keep it where you're doing the best for your audience to do good content. In radio, which is the advantage that people that were in radio in the first place have over people that are just getting into podcasting, is that we understand the importance of the time that we have for our audience, the time spent listening. And knowing that, listen, they're going to sit through commercial breaks. And we need to make sure, and it's not like the commercial breaks are good anymore like they used to be. Back in the day, I've said this many times, we used to have jingles. 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. You would listen to the radio and you would hear jingles. You would find things that would continue to keep people engaged in listening because it would hear something melodic and fun and something catchy. And that would also kind of continue to keep people engaged on the station long enough for the break to be done and for the next music block or the next talk set comes up, whatever that is. You want to keep that going. And that's what podcasters need to learn about this here too. That if you want to make sure that they're not going to be offended or not going to be disappointed or frustrated by the advertising that you have to sit through, they're either not going to listen to it or you're going to do what you need to do to keep people listening after the fact. And it's not just a simple tease. You want to make sure that your content from the first minute to minute 60, at least for this program, has to be consistent, has to be good, and has to be something that people want to listen to. I think I try to do the best to do that. And of course, this program's not easy to do this because media and broadcasting, there's a lot of places to listen to it. But for my end, what I'm talking about might be a little bit in the weeds for some people, and that's okay. But this is because I think there's some people out there that might be interested in what I'm talking about. And what I'm surprised by as well is the audience I get from overseas that listen to this program to get the American perspective on media. And even more specifically, where I come from a radio background and I look at the media from a radio lens, because I still do. But if I had to go and do radio again, and I thought about it, when I had that chance in 2019 to program that Spanish radio station, and knowing that we're going to still put 8 to 10 minutes of advertising in between, that content, that programming had to be good across the board. I had to keep people engaged and not feel like that they were going to be burdened by having to sit through a commercial break. So we worked hard on that, made the commercials as best as we could. But we know that the clients also don't want to do anything special when it comes to advertising anymore. The ad agencies are not doing anything special either, because radio is an afterthought. When you look at advertising now for radio, it's such an afterthought with the Progressives, the State Farms, all the car insurance companies, and all the other agencies that are out there doing commercials, say if it's for Kohl's or Home Depot or, whatever. It's different. There's not a lot of food sources. There's not a lot of food stores or, supermarkets or fast food places or things like that are doing a lot of commercials anyway. But it's it doesn't matter. The message is the message. It doesn't matter how you flower up the message on radio, but it does. And it should matter again. But until then, if you're going to make people sit through commercials, whatever they might be, that are going to be provided by your podcast host, which, by the way, they might be bland and it might not be anything special, but hey, if you can do the due diligence for the advertisers that are going to, if your audience is coming in and they're going to sit through the entire show, and you make sure to make your show compelling enough that they'll sit through and wait for the commercials to go through to hear you keep going and not skip through them, that's the service you need to do for your audience. And that's what people need to learn as a very important lesson, that every minute counts on radio, just like every minute counts in podcasting. Treat it like a radio show. Think about how the radio shows out there, when I talk about the fact that all those talk radio shows that are out there, whether it's ESPN or Fox or all these conservative talk shows, liberal talk shows out there, they got to sit through. You get a 5-minute news break, and then you have about, another 11, 12 minutes of commercials in between? And some of those ad breaks are 4 minutes each, or 5 minutes in some cases. And you got to make sure that you're doing the right thing to keep people listening so long that they're going to sit around and wait for the commercial break to come in. And it's amazing how some shows will do the thing where, and listen, don't judge me on this, but you know what? Rush Limbaugh is a good example of talk radio. And a lot of other radio shows do the same thing now, where he would do his segment at 6 after the hour, 6 minutes after the hour. It started at 12 o'clock, and it would start at 12:06. And when he'd do his show, instead of taking the commercial break in the middle of the hour, say normally the commercial break would be around 12:18, 12:20. He would actually take it a little bit later, almost like 12:24. And then when the break gets done, it's around 12:28 when he comes back. And then he has about 30 to 60 seconds to make a comment and then go right to back to commercial break. So they already did a 3-4 minute commercial break. Now here comes another 4-minute commercial break. And so his show was compelling enough, whether you like it or not. His show was compelling enough to get people to listen to that good 20-minute block that he'd give you after the news. And then you were interested in sticking around roughly 8 out of the next 9 minutes of commercials to sit around and wait for him to come back in and do another 20 minutes and do the same thing over again. When you listen to Howard Stern, remember how many times he would do a 30-minute block, sometimes 40 minutes. And remember, at the end when he was on radio, those commercials went 12 minutes. 12 minutes. I don't even know how people used to stick around that. I remember I used to listen to that through, and sometimes I would listen to the whole of the commercials. Because one of the things that he would do is to make sure they would have live reads with Howard in them. And they would go through the rest of the commercials they had, and there would be really good sponsors on Howard because really good people, really good advertisers wanted to be on and put good commercials out there because they were spending a whole lot of money to be on there. In the morning, during his time slot, they needed to make sure to put out the best. So that's why Howard's show was so successful in radio. But he had to be so good for every minute that he put out there. And then he takes a break, and you're going to have to sit through 12 minutes of commercials. Twice. Sometimes it was supposed to be like twice an hour. But the reason why his show would always run long is because he had to run that 12-minute commercial break, 5 times, 4 times? So, out of a 4-hour show, 48 minutes or so are commercials. And there was an audience, a big audience around the country that would listen and sit through all those commercials to do that. So you want to keep this as a very important lesson for podcasting out there. I'm not telling you what to do with your shows. I'm telling you what you need to do with your shows. You can talk about whatever you want, but please keep in mind your audience. Pay respect to your audience and your advertisers, because they all matter. And it matters about what you put on the show, what you put on the air, as we call it. It's the same thing here. You want to keep that very important lesson in mind, and that's what you always need to focus on when you're doing your podcast. And really, if you just follow that one lesson and then just apply everything else that goes along with that, you could do a great podcast. You could be the next Joe Rogan or Call Me Daddy or, whatever. This American Life. You can be all those. By the way, why is it that some of the NPR shows that are run as radio shows, in a clock with radio, how come they do so well as podcasts? Ask yourself that question. I always say you should always learn from radio on how to do podcasting. The radio people already have an edge in the game. And then the other way around, we learn from podcasting. Like, I've learned a lot from podcasters that were never on radio, and they brought their own spin to things on the programming side, and realizing the casual format of podcasting, which was even better. There's a lot of cases, the way that talk is here, the variety of genres of conversations we can have now, the conversations we can hear on at various times on various topics is even better now. And it's more casual. Even from down to where the shows are not even being structured like they're in some basic studio, that you're all seeing them doing something in couches or in chairs, and they're all having a boom mic or an arm set up next to them so they can go and talk. Or they're on a desk, whatever they are, in front of their webcam, and they're just going along and doing their thing, which is great. And it works out that way. So there's positive in podcasting. And all I'm saying, it's a plateau. But podcasting is not going away. It's not slowing down. It's an important medium. And it's also one of the most accessible mediums out there. And it's surprising that radio is still able to go and keep some foothold on any kind of market of audience for audio because of where they are now. But anyway, there's some studies that talk about where things are when it comes to the audio market in general. Nielsen has done more about that now. And they recently put out a new study, the Smart Audio Report. NPR and Edison Research put that together. We'll talk about that real quick. There's a handful of stories that have come out about audio. We want to talk about that here. So, from Radio Inside, in their 2022 Smart Audio Report, they said the ubiquity of voice technology, it's highlighted the increased usage of voice technology is now set where Americans 18 plus owning a smart speaker now consumes about 35% of the public. 35% of Americans 18 plus now own a smart speaker. And that 2022, 62% of Americans 18 years and older use a voice assistant on any device, and those devices can include smart speakers, smartphones, TV remotes, in-car systems, a computer or a laptop, a tablet, or among others. And that helps out for those that want to be able to go and say, okay, with radio, with podcasting, the ease of getting people to listen to audio, the access to audio, where they don't have to go and turn on a Bluetooth or access an app or anything like that, or just turn on a radio, that they could just go ahead and talk into a smart assistant and get started. So that's an interesting story right there on that. Then the next part about the audio market is challenging today for radio than it was 2 years ago. Post-pandemic, a lot of things have changed for radio. So the National Association of Broadcasters says the story remains quite similar to the previous report, where local TV and radio stations are competing against a litany of online content providers. And the National Association of Broadcasters says regulators have yet to adopt policy changes to reflect those undisputed marketplace realities that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And then there's more talk about, when it comes to traditional media, about the ownership situation, the deregulation that we've talked about since 1996. One of my best favorite episodes that I ever got to record was talking about the 25th anniversary of the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and the effect it had on radio and on media in general. And they still talk about it here today in terms of the SEC should serve as motivation for what it sees as the need to re-examine current media ownership rules with an eye towards eliminating or revising rules that uniquely burden broadcast stations but not the larger competitors backed by big tech. And in this, they say from the NAB, quote, the commission must consider the real-world consequences of imposing in a highly competitive marketplace a burdensome and outdated regulatory regime on an advertising-supported industry with high operational costs that must nonetheless provide audio and video content in markets across the country at no cost to the public. Without changes, there will come a time when the math simply does not add up. The radio industry is already dealing with more things because right now there are going to be fees from the FCC that are going to be increased up 13%. Meanwhile, the budget for the FCC is only going up 2%. So they're just charging more fees just to charge more fees. That's the latest proposal from the FCC. And radio stations are not happy about it. And radio companies are even worse. They bring up SiriusXM as a formidable competitor. And that not only is it in 82% of new vehicles sold, but the satellite radio operator has begun offering a small number of free ad-supported channels. And after they acquired Pandora and Stitcher, and now have a unified sales team, they have the company now making greater inroads with national advertisers. Then there's the part about the music industry with its win to fight a performance royalty hanging over its comments. The Music First Coalition, the Future Music Coalition, tell the FCC that while on one hand, radio stations have a declining share of the audio market, they say AM and FM still have a significant competitive advantage because it does not pay royalties for on-air spins under current federal copyright law. And the two groups urge the FCC to reject attempts to expand local radio ownership limits, that it would have an effect on music creators and lead to a reduction in diversity of what is put on the air. And I agree with that. It's too little too late, though. I mean, the FCC could go ahead and just break a couple of companies up and let all those stations get pushed off into a trust, and different owners can buy up. I mean, when you think about the trust that was put together for some of the stations that Clear Channel, aka iHeartRadio, had to go and put and let go, and other stations that do the same thing, where smaller market stations that they had, or smaller signals that some of these companies might have been let go as part of the bankruptcy. That was part of the thing. Well, that should be something that happens here to kind of just break that up. But the FCC could do something like that, but they're not going to. It would definitely help, but they're not doing anything about it. But what you can do in the FCC, if you're not going to do any breaking up of these companies, what you can do is you can continue to go and do the fee increases. And, Congress can also give some victories to the music industry to make these stations pay royalties. Because if the royalties have to get paid at some point, and iHeartRadio or Cumulus or Odyssey, they either have to go through the whole issue of having to go and pay royalties for all these significant radio stations under whichever act, Music Modernization, the AM/FM Act, the fact that either the songs are pre-1972 or current, and the music has to be paid for with royalties to songwriters, the people that own the masters, the vocalists, all of that. I mean, the music industry, I'm sure, would want some piece of that, because then, they can get that off their artists. That's something that has to be happening. But nobody said anything yet. They're not doing anything about it. And that's an issue that's going on that needs to be considered. So I'll take one other story that just came in here that I want to bring up, that I meant to go and talk about here. I'll bring it up into this point now about music, because there is talk about how the industry for music is trying to go get some money back from radio. So NME talks about this. Royalty rates for musicians and publishers to be raised by the Copyright Royalty Board. that musicians will receive a long overdue 44% royalty increase after years of delays. Now, this is going to apply to the streamers. That's Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Now let's move along into journalism, which, after everything I already talked about before, we're not going to take too much time on journalism because, sometimes I just need to touch on this and just feel like I am just beating a dead horse, talk about their decline. But there are studies that are out there that continue to talk about it on a regular basis. So first thing I'm going to talk about when it comes to journalism is that now reporters that are in charge of reporting the news. So news and journalism are one and the same. Many reporters don't believe in equal coverage. That's from the Pew Research Center. They surveyed journalists in the U.S. conducted between February 16th and March 17th, 2022. And the study was written as Journalists Sense Turmoil in Their Industry Amid Continued Passion for Their Work. And in this, they said that 55% of U.S. journalists who say every side does not always equal coverage, does not always deserve equal coverage. And the other 44% say journalists should always strive to give every side equal coverage. But see, we don't need to have all the sides of coverage. And that's the part I think that everybody needs to realize. Journalists, we don't need their perspective anymore. It doesn't make a difference now. What we want them to do is just report the damn news. That's it. That's all that people care about now anyways. In the broader community, the vast majority believe in equal coverage, 76%. So they say that at a time when the trust in the media is nearing all-time lows, the disconnect between what the public says it wants and what editors and reporters are delivering looms large, particularly in those of the minds of those in the business. David Stringer, who's publisher of the Lawton Constitution, past president of the Oklahoma Press Association, talked to the Washington Times saying that, quote, we need to be aware of the disconnect and attempt to strengthen / maintain / improve the trust of our audience. Polling from Pew and Gallup found levels of trust in the media dipping, powered in particular by a drop in confidence among self-identified Republicans. And it shows that Republicans have the most interest in equal treatment, 87%, 68% among Democrats. But politics doesn't matter. Because for those that also want to have their side of the story being told or a certain slant, they don't matter. They should not matter. News should be completely neutral and objective. But we know that these journalists want to be editorialists. They want to be opinion editorial writers. They don't want to just go ahead and have the story written because then they can't do much about it. And then all they are just reporters. They're just, regurgitating information that they wrote down. So they're just data entry. And they want to be considered something more. And that's part of what it is here too. And I understand where they're coming from with that. But it doesn't matter. They are not doing anything to help at all. And as a result, newspapers, see, there's a thing where the news writers, the news reporters don't want to be investigative. Like, actually learn the most news possible. Gather the most news possible. News and news reporting should be about news gathering and investigations. And actually not just doing calls on a phone or doing tweets or going through people on social media, sliding their DMs on Instagram. They should be doing more than just that. Get off your ass in the office. Get out of your remote workstation at home. Go out. Take off your slippers. Put on some shoes. Put on some clothes. And go out and report. Get a microphone, get a recorder in somebody's mouth and get them to talk or get some information out there and do some research. It's not that hard. But they don't want to do that. Neiman Lab put out a story about the U.S. now losing an average of 2 weekly newspapers a week. So the local newspapers, 2,500 American papers have disappeared since 2005. The local small end papers. Right? Those are the ones that we don't see at all anymore. And so what happened there? Like, you ask yourself, when I'm looking at all this going on and I'm saying, man, yeah, there's so much here that we don't get to hear about anymore and it sucks. So what are you going to do next? when I think about going back a while ago and an interview that I did when I was still doing interviews, which, by the way, I hope you all appreciated me doing the interview with Shava Odagian of System of a Down, that I authored that into the program. And I wanted to make sure to put that point across. Now, back in April 2019, I talked with Nicole Jordan with Radix Collective, her own independent PR firm. And I remember talking about the future of digital media and journalism's journey back to credibility. And you know what? They have not made any difference. They have not made a budge, which sucks. But that's where we are right now. And what else are you going to do? At the moment right now, there are 545 digital-only state and local news sites in existence in 2022. And that includes more than 170 local businesses and special interest sites, community newsletters, and a growing number of network local outlets, some of which span multiple sites. And so the story talks about how digital-only news sites remain predominantly a big city phenomenon, and local papers don't have a digital site to read in their place. They're poor, older, and lack affordable and reliable high-speed digital service. So there's that problem they're doing right there. Averaging 2 a week going away. So just to get the small town information, police blotters, bake sales, or whatever kind of information you would get from a local paper. And you're not even get that anymore. The weekly newspapers, some of those were actually pretty informative and good. I got to work with one of those. Now, not even a thing anymore. And there used to be a time where that actually used to work. Washington Post actually talked about every week, the more newspapers close and news deserts grow larger. So they're taking the story from Neiman Lab and talking about the increase of this going on. Talk about news deserts. Communities lacking a news source that provides meaningful and trustworthy local reporting on issues such as health, government, and the environment. Well, part of that information is already being taken care of by the local agencies of that. So political leaders, the government agencies, the cities, the townships, the villages, whatever local community that you're in, they all have different websites that all have different information anyway. So the need of them having to go and report to a reporter to put the same information out there and just reiterate it probably is not needed. So you have to understand that part too. So they say that local newspapers are hardly the only sources that can do the job, but they're the ones that traditionally fill the role, and they're disappearing. But that's because it's easy to go and get your information out there through social media and with various websites that can just report it themselves without having to go and put out papers and the printing costs, the circulation and all that, and trying to get advertisers that are dwindling to go ahead and put their ads quarter, half inch, full page into a newspaper for that matter. But right now in America, there are fewer than 6,500 left. So yeah, local newspapers are not going to be around as much anymore. And they talk about even in these regions that still have newspapers or other news organizations, local newsrooms have been far less robust. Huge numbers of journalists have been laid off, never to return. Hurting the profession of individual journalists, of course, but that's far from the main problem. Now, they're trying to say here that as local news disappears, bad things happen, voter participation declines, corruption in business and government finds more fertile ground, and false information spreads wildly. The Medill Local News Initiative Senior Associate Dean Tim Franklin says that people often turn to Facebook groups where rumors run rampant. The need to innovate is urgent. Now, he also says that he finds it encouraging that Americans have become attuned in recent years to the local news crisis, praising philanthropy and innovation that have come, for example, helping the Baltimore Banner to launch a new digital site in recent weeks. So when some initial efforts are failing, there are digital models being founded instead. And in this story, they talk to someone that says that, quote, we already live in a polarized country, and part of that polarization stems from our digital divide and our local news divide. We have to think about how we reach people who aren't digitally connected and how our support connects efforts that get beyond the city. Okay, you can try to talk about rural journalism all you want. I still think there are people out there that can get the information out there, and you can talk about how Facebook can be discredited or that there might be some rumors that are put out there and some information that might not be correct. I get that part. But that would happen anyway with journalists in general, because they can't just report the news. They just can't, put down listings or just put information as it was. I mean, one of the most unfulfilling jobs I had to do when it came to the news in the sports department at the Palm Beach Post was being an agate. And agate, all they basically did was just insert information, whether it was from the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, whether it was conference standings, the scoreboard, the box scores, all that information that we would put into a newspaper, and having that in place, and just knowing there was newspapers that did the job of that. And that was good information for people to look at if they wanted to learn information about that would be not on a website. Before websites, we had to go and look on the box score in the newspaper. But now, the digital disruption that I constantly talk about has changed the face of news forever. And that with Google and others being able to go and do such a good job of aggregating news, like, let me tell you, Google News recently just made an overhaul on their look. And I kid you not, it looks like a newspaper now. If I want to look at Google News, it's like a newspaper. Listen, it's like USA Today, a For You page following U.S., world, local, business, technology, entertainment, sports, science, and health. You have everything that you need. And even when I go to the For You page here in general, I can look through and it's like a newspaper. I don't need anything else. And I'm getting, by the way, local information as well. So on my page here alone, Google offers the weather forecast, offers me a briefing. My local news, they have it for Royal Palm, Boca Raton. They're connected to every possible news outlet you can find. So in my area in West Palm Beach, I got Channel 12, Channel 5, Palm Beach Post. Then you have other picks that are curated for me, which works out well too. They're doing all that. What do I need anything from anybody else? And that's where I'm coming from with all this. I look and I'm saying to myself, man, I'm just looking at the stories and I'm just saying, wow, I'm getting everything I want for news. Apple News does the same thing, and I'm sure there are other news sites that are out there that just aggregate. The aggregators are doing the better job of just doing the news. And they have and the only thing that matters for these editors and publishers and these writers is that their stories make it onto these aggregated sites. And for me, I don't care about opinion. By the way, the news sites here, you might have opinionated pieces within the stories, but if you want to go through, you can determine which sites are going to give you just the news and what you need to know and which ones are not. Because for some of these news sites out here that aggregate, it's the money they're going to make on the advertising for people to just jump onto the site. And they'll make the kind of money they want, and they can aggregate from everybody else's news. Because we want to have it all in once, right? It's just like how we like our Netflix, just like how we like our apps, our phones. We want to have everything all in one place. We're not going to rely anymore on any one source to be our end-all, be-all of information. So if you want to go to CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, you want to go to BBC, you want to go to Yahoo, you want to go to Google, Apple, you can do all what you want. And it works that way. Like, I'd rather go to an aggregator that gives me all the information I want to go and look for, and that's it. And I'll tell you, I can go to Google News regularly, and if I need to get myself informed, I can find what I want. Plus, I don't have to find all the news stories I don't care about, because recommended based on your interests. That's what's important about all that's going on here. Okay, so there's two more stories I want to just break into real quick here. First off, there was a story from Variety about streamers embracing a brave new world of ads, and what will the consumers say about this? That was the important part here, because there's a lot more advertising out there than there is, and the streaming services are now having to put ads in anyway because they have no choice. The subscription rates they're putting out right now, they have to find a way to go ahead and work it out. Peacock and Amazon are introducing virtual product placement, allowing brands and products to be digitally inserted into content as it streams. Roku and Walmart have partnered for an attempted leap forward in e-commerce, allowing viewers to purchase advertised products directly from their TVs. We heard about this going on a while ago, and now we're going to finally get there at some point. So viewers can simply press OK with the remote on a shoppable ad and proceed to checkout with their payment details easily pre-populated. And then from tapping OK on the Walmart checkout page, places the order, And then it streamlines Roku's shoppable ads experience, which is already allowing viewers to click on an ad and have a message about the product sent to their phone. So yeah, now you can just go ahead and like go on a QR code and then you could go right to buy a product just like that. Because I might as well do that more than anything else. And that is incredible. I thought it was an interesting story they're bringing about now. Virtual product placement. Look for that coming up. Remember King of Podcasts saying that to you first. One other story I want to talk about is Minions: The Rise of Gru, which made over $100 million domestically this past weekend. And Thor: Love and Thunder is going to come out this weekend. And I bet you that's going to just blow the house off. Well, Minions is one of the last big major box office movies from 2020 that finally gets released. So whatever movies that were left over in 2020 are done. The whole slate of whatever's supposed to be put out in 2020 is out. And when they look at the movies that were pushed out after all, there were so many that were put on here. And the 2020 holdouts that we finally got to see after all, last year was Death on the Nile. This year we saw Morbius, Bob's Burgers, and Top Gun Maverick. They released, and only Top Gun Maverick actually made over $100 million. And now they're seeing, because of the fact that Minions did so well for animated films, that now there's adjusted expectations for animated films. The Bad Guys was also an animated film that did really well. Bob's Burgers didn't do too bad. Animated is doing okay. And Lightyear, I mean, they had their problems because they might have done some stuff in the content in terms of the storyline and what they did and how detached it was from Toy Story. The Toy Story franchise, that people were kind of like a little bit distant on going to Lightyear after all, even though I thought the movie was fine. I watched it. Let's see what happens. But yeah, when you look at where everything is right now, Minions: Rise of Gru did really well. That's good for them. And if I look at what they've done so far in terms of what they've made in numbers, let me look real quick on that. Minions: Rise of Gru has gotten $154 million made domestically, almost $100 million internationally. So it's already at almost $250 million. $250 billion that they have made so far. So they're doing okay with that for themselves. And that's going to be the show for tonight. Thank you for listening in. I hope you'll subscribe to the show. I hope you'll share this if you're listening on or watching on YouTube. And you'll hit a like and share on there. Let people know about it. And for those that are sticking around and listening to the show after you found the Kate Bush episodes that I did a few weeks ago, thank you for sticking around and listening to the show. I really appreciate it. And if there's other content you want me to go and talk about, there's things you want me to hear, you want to hear more from me about, please reach out to me. My email address is kingofpodcasts@yahoo.com, or just look for @kingofpodcasts, any social media outlet. So Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, I'm all there. Anyway, come back next week for the Broadcasters Podcast. Until then, remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.